As this conflict enters yet another uncertain chapter, what remains unmistakable is that both the battlefield and the diplomatic arena have shifted into a phase where every announcement, every claim of territorial advance, and every political statement becomes part of a broader struggle over narrative, leverage, and legitimacy. Russia's attempt to frame alleged gains in Pokrovsk and Vovchansk as decisive territorial victories reflects not only military ambition, but also the strategic desire to approach negotiations from a position of perceived control. Ukrainian officials, however, continue to insist that the fighting in these areas remains active, that their forces are still resisting, and that no definitive change of control has been observed on the ground. This divergence is emblematic of a war where facts remain contested, images and casualty reports shift by the hour, and the broader meaning of each development depends heavily on the political lens through which it is interpreted. Against this backdrop, Ukraine's leadership is intensifying diplomatic efforts, seeking to ensure that any negotiated outcome does not erode the fundamental principles it has defended since the first day of the invasion: territorial integrity, national sovereignty, and the right to determine its own future without external coercion. That determination is now being tested more directly as international discussions gain momentum, particularly around the revised framework put forward by Ukraine and key European partners after rejecting Washington's earlier 28-point proposal as unbalanced and, in the words of Ukrainian officials, insufficient to address the core security challenges posed by continued Russian aggression. In these meetings with European leaders in London, Brussels, Paris, and Berlin, Ukraine has emphasized repeatedly that concessions which undermine territorial claims or alter Ukraine's internationally recognized borders remain unacceptable. Even as some global actors call for pragmatism or phased compromise, Kyiv has been firm in its position, stressing that any settlement must reflect not only the realities of war, but also international law and the principle that borders cannot be redrawn through force. This position has been reiterated in public and private conversations, often underscored by expressions of gratitude for continued military and economic support from European capitals, yet coupled with clear warnings that premature concessions would risk emboldening Moscow, destabilizing Eastern Europe, and setting a dangerous precedent for future conflicts. Meanwhile, Russia's diplomatic outreach, including high-profile meetings in Moscow, seeks to cultivate the perception that it is willing to entertain negotiations while simultaneously continuing offensive operations in Donetsk, Kharkiv, and other frontline regions. The duality of this approach underscores the complexity of interpreting signals from Moscow. Declarations of openness to dialogue paired with intense bombardments, civilian casualties, and steady pressure along key axes. On the ground, the human cost continues to escalate. Drone strikes in Sumy have left neighborhoods without power for days. Attacks across Donetsk have killed and injured civilians, leaving families displaced, homes destroyed, and infrastructure severely damaged. As winter conditions deepen, the humanitarian pressures on both sides of the front line intensify, from inadequate heating and electricity to shortages in medical supplies, water purification, and shelter. International humanitarian agencies warn that the coming months could produce some of the harshest living conditions since the war began, particularly if renewed offensives disrupt aid corridors or overwhelm local capacities. The people of Ukraine now endure a psychological strain compounded by uncertainty over negotiations that could determine the fate of long-contested regions. Many fear that the diplomatic process, while necessary, may risk drifting toward geopolitical calculations that undervalue the experiences and sacrifices of communities living closest to the fighting. Their concerns are amplified by the reality that, despite ongoing discussions, no side has yet articulated a clear roadmap for reconstruction, demilitarization, governance, or the reintegration of territories where thousands have been displaced. European leaders, for their part, stress that unity remains essential. Their statements have grown sharper in tone as they warn that any peace arrangement must not reward aggression or leave Ukraine vulnerable to renewed attacks. Their message has been consistent. Long-term security for Ukraine requires not only a durable ceasefire, but also guarantees that future Russian escalations will be deterred through collective international measures. Several governments have increased military support packages, citing the intensified pressure on the Eastern Front and the need to ensure that Ukrainian forces remain adequately supplied in both defensive and counter-offensive capacities. These commitments come amid growing concerns that Russia may attempt to open new fronts or exploit perceived weaknesses during the winter months when mobility becomes limited, but strategic surprise becomes more achievable. At the same time, global actors outside Europe continue to watch closely. Nations across Asia, the Middle East, Africa, and the Americas recognize that the outcome of this conflict carries implications far beyond Europe's borders. For countries navigating complex relationships with both Moscow and Western powers, the war represents a test of diplomatic neutrality, economic resilience, and strategic alignment. In energy markets, disruptions remain a serious concern as oil and gas flows fluctuate, sanctions evolve, and alternative supply routes are explored. Grain exports, which once flowed freely through the Black Sea region, are still unpredictable, affecting food security in regions that rely heavily on Ukrainian agricultural shipments. Analysts warn that prolonged instability in Eastern Europe could exacerbate global inflation, deepen humanitarian crises in import-dependent nations, and distort commodity markets for years to come. This interconnectedness underscores a broader truth. The war in Ukraine is not isolated to its trenches, cities, and political chambers. It is tied directly to global systems of security, economics, technology, and diplomacy. And as each day brings new developments, the governments worldwide must confront the possibility that the conflict's eventual resolution, whether negotiated or imposed, will reshape geopolitical dynamics long after the final ceasefire is declared. Some observers believe the war has already redefined international alliances, accelerated military modernization across Europe, and heightened scrutiny of energy dependencies. Others argue that its deeper, lasting effects may not be fully understood for years, especially if contested regions remain unstable or unresolved. For Ukraine, the immediate focus remains survival, restoration of territorial control, and prevention of concessions that could undermine future sovereignty. For Russia, strategic objectives appear aimed at consolidating battlefield advantages, shaping negotiation narratives, and projecting strength despite heavy losses and international isolation. And for the international community, the challenge lies in balancing diplomatic urgency with moral and legal imperatives, ensuring that the pursuit of peace does not inadvertently cement injustices or enable further aggression. The coming period, shaped by winter conditions, negotiations, political transitions, and continuing military pressure, could mark a decisive phase in determining whether this conflict edges toward a settlement or spirals into renewed escalation. As each side evaluates its tactical and diplomatic options, and as global leaders intensify their efforts to influence the trajectory of talks, the situation remains fragile and deeply unpredictable. And so, as the war stretches into yet another unforgiving season, one fact remains clear: the decisions taken in these crucial weeks on the battlefield, in diplomatic meeting rooms, and across national capitals will shape not only the fate of Pokrovsk, Vovchansk, and the broader front line, but also the future of European security, the integrity of international norms, and the lived reality of millions whose lives have been irrevocably altered by a conflict now moving through its most consequential moment yet.